A little feeble. If you could be a little louder, it would be more clear for the rest of the students as well.
Yeah, is it better now?
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay, sure. So one query that I have, right? So if I want to take some feedback from students, right? So how do I do that? Do they use a chat to
Yeah, they will use a
let me know,
chat.
or just a few queries I want to check with them?
Yeah, they will use a chat platform.
Yeah.
Students, any queries of Mr. Dinakaran, you can give an answer through the chat platform. I will consolidate it for him.
Sure. Yeah. I'm just sharing my screen. Just let me know if
Yeah,
it's...
1 second. I'll let you share.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Hey, so hi everyone. So I'm actually very glad to have this webinar presented. So it's been a long time since I've actually graduated out of college. So I've been working for almost 14 years now. So I think it's good to interact with students again back in college, right? So I think so this topic, right, as the brief introduction that we had, right? So the cloud computing as such, right? So it's something not entirely new. It's something that we have been already we are aware of it, but it's represented in different forms, etc. So that's how it's been, right? So it's not a entirely new thing. There are few changes that are there here and there, but high level, right? So it's not something very new, but the way how it's being applied, so that is where I think we have changes, like some new approaches and patterns, etc. Right? So before going further, right, I just want to get a feel, right, as to so just maybe just in the chat, right, just let me know. So what is the programming language that you are primarily aware of, and what are the servers, right, in which you kind of deploy your code, right? If you have any experience on that, right? So what is the language that you primarily use whenever you got you had your semesters, right? So what language you are aware of, and what kind of servers that you have actually deployed your code. For example, it could be a Java code that you are deploying into Tomcat or any other servers, right? So can you just probably give some brief responses on that? Like, what is the language that you kind of, aware, not at an expert level, but any idea, but just on the server side as well, which application server that you use or web server that you use. Can I get some responses on that?
Yes, students, please answer on the chat box. The servers on I mean the coding which C, Java, Python. Please share it on the chat screen as quick as possible.
Yeah. So the reason is like when you talk about cloud computing, so it's mostly on the servers is what I will actually be referring to. So it would be very important to understand what server is actually I'm talking about. So there are two different types of servers that we normally refer to, right? So yeah, I could see the responses. Yeah, so programming languages as such is good. So any exposure to servers, right? You write your code, right? So you have your Java code, PHP code. So where do you run that code? Like, do you use any servers? So for example, your Tomcat servlet container, or Apache web server, or JBoss server. So anything on that sort that you guys are like aware of? So I could see languages
Students,
there. Yeah, I can see some languages, but anything on
can
the
I get
server,
more
right?
answers? Yes, can we get more answers from the engineering students?
Okay, so Cloud IDE. Okay. So anything
MySQL.
other than the languages, yeah. MySQL. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. GAE. Yeah. Okay. I think it's good. Okay. And any other exposure on that? Okay. Sure.
There's one
So
Ruby.
yeah. Okay. So yeah. Okay. So yeah. So basically, right. So essentially, just to take a step backwards, right. So when you talk about cloud computing, so the first thing is like you have your Java code, right, or your Ruby or whatever it is, right. So the code is generally like you have to if you are going to have a web application. So the web application you need to kind of run it on a server. So when I say a server, right? So what it is like there are two parts to it. One is the physical box, right? So wherein you probably have a Windows OS or a Unix OS in which you have the hardware part of it, right? So you have a particular mission in which you have a OS and in which you have the as basically the physical part, right? So the second part is basically the application side, right? So we have it as an application server or a web server, right? So that is something like you probably be like learning more about it. It's basically a web server or application server, right? So some examples of a web server would be Apache, web server, or it could be a servlet container. So generally Java as such, right, or C program as it's a standalone, it can run without a server, right? You can just standalone, you can run it. But typically in a when you are building a web application, so all you need is basically a server. So a server as such is mentioned. The physical part is something that we already aware. The other one is basically the web servers or the application server, Tomcat, WebSphere application server. So these are the things that are primarily used actually whenever you want to deploy a code. It could be so it is like slightly different in case of HTML. So in HTML, probably the HTML is getting rendered on the browser, but otherwise, these servers are something that is are mostly used. So somebody I think mentioned about GAE. So that's probably a platform as a service, right? So that is how it's actually, right? Okay. So we'll get started. So with that, being a small introduction, right, to what is a server, etc. Right. So we can probably get started, right? So this is a very high level view on what is that we are going to cover, right? So I'll probably not spend too much time on this, but I can probably explain in the future slides. So yeah. So I think one of the main objective that I thought would be good for you is basically to understand what cloud computing is, right? At a very high level, right? So what do you mean by cloud computing? And we are able to kind of understand and define it, right? And the second aspect of it that I want as a takeaway from this session for everyone here is what are the factors, right, that led to the adoption of cloud computing. So any new technology, right? So it would not be just like that we will start using it. So there is a certain need for which we probably choose a technology, right? So what are the reason why we actually went with technology, etc., right? So and the other aspects of it is basically there are various types of cloud computing we have. So something like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. So what does each of them mean, right? And business benefits, right? So when we go with cloud computing, so even though it's a technology thing, so as a business, right? So what is the advantages that we are getting out of using the cloud computing, right? And what are the different ways in which you can actually use the cloud computing, and what are the risks, right? And then traditionally between the traditional IT and cloud computing, what is the difference, right? So this is primarily the objective that of the session. Okay. So I hope you are able to still see my screen, I guess, right? Can you see
Yes,
my
we are able to
screen with the
see. We are
picture?
able to see you, Dinakar.
Sure, right? So yeah, so let's probably continue, right? So one question that I have, right? So probably you can just reply on the chat, right? So in your day-to-day usage of internet, social media and all that stuff. So do you think you are using cloud already? Like probably in different forms, right? But do you think that you are already using the cloud? like, probably if you're thinking like, there is something that is already in your day-to-day life, right? So we are actually, cloud computing touches our life in an everyday basis, right? So can you probably give from your perspective, right? Even though you could be right or wrong. So is there any services, right, in the internet that you're using wherein, you think cloud computing is used? Can I have some responses? Yeah, Amazon. Yeah, sure. Gmail. Yeah, that's good. And so anything on your day-to-day life, right, wherein you think cloud computing is used? So again, right. So for example, we talked about Amazon or Gmail, right? So a lot of this, if you look at it, immediately you will not be able to, confirm whether this is particularly like, cloud computing, or it's a normal way of, building and delivering IT applications, right? So it's not very obvious from it, but the way how we can understand is from a scale perspective, right? For example, if Gmail is basically used across the world, right? So throughout the country, and then there is a lot of people that are using. So the number of people using it, the volume of, emails that is coming in. So all of these can be only, we will be able to only meet all these requirements only if you are using cloud, right? So without cloud, you will probably not be able to meet the volume of skills, right? So almost all social media, like, YouTube or Twitter, Facebook, right, or Netflix, right, wherever we watch this content, right, all major players in the market, right? So they kind of, use the cloud computing to power all their infrastructure. Okay, but from end user perspective, let's say for example, you are consuming Netflix, right? So when you consume Netflix, you will be probably in a TV or a browser, but you will not probably know whether, it is actually powered by cloud computing or is it something else, right? It could be a standard, way in which, they could deliver it. But from an end user perspective, it doesn't matter in this case. For example, if you are watching something on Netflix or using YouTube, right? You don't really care about whether it's cloud computing or not. All you know is like in your browser, you're able to see this, or you're in the mobile app, something is loading, right? But if you are going to be working in Netflix, right, as a developer or an engineer, or if you're going to work in YouTube, then you will be building applications, right? You will be building sites using HTML, you may use Java, right? So in those cases, whenever you write those Java code or whatever it is, then you're going to deploy, like, host that code. When I say deploy, basically that's a term that we use to actually host the code. And then in that point, right, as a developer or a web developer or a mobile app developer, so those during those times, you will be working on cloud. So your code that you are actually built, it will be deployed into the cloud, and then everybody will be using that, right? uh, so I'm just taking a pause at this particular point of time. So any queries or, jargons that is not very clear from whatever I actually talked about?
Participants, any
So one of the challenges is
technical
like, there are,
terminology? Yeah, there are arts and science students who are non
yeah,
computer science
any.
students also, Mr. Dinakar. Yeah, students, if you have any terminology which Mr. Dinakaran used, if you want clarity on that, you can put it across on the chat. உங்களுக்கு ஏதாவது ஒரு வேர்டுக்கு மீனிங் தெரியல, அது ரொம்ப டெக்னிக்கலா போயிடுது, அது புரியணும் அப்படின்னா, he is giving you a time to put it on the chat. I mean, this is not for the engineering students. The non-engineering arts and science students are also a part. உங்களுக்கு ஏதாவது ஒரு டெர்மினாலஜிக்கு மீனிங் தெரியணும்னா put it across in the chat platform. I think the clear.
Yeah. So I think you can probably put down all your queries. Yeah. So I think you can start putting the queries. I will probably take a pause every now and then and probably answer, right, whenever I have time. So let's move on. So cloud computing as such, right? So it's basically a new way of thinking, okay, as to how we have to, empower our like, applications, right? So for example, all IT applications that we are building, it is for a specific business case, right? So for example, ICICI Bank or HDFC Bank, they are building an application. It is just for banking services, right? So the same way Amazon is actually hosting their services, it's for e-commerce, right? So like that, everybody, there's a certain reason, business reason for which we are actually doing this, right? So what actually cloud helps is basically a new consumption model and a delivery model, right? Wherein, everybody can actually leverage it. So just to give a background, right? So cloud as such, right, as a big thing. So all the major tech companies like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, they were already using some of the cloud computing concepts already, right? And then they have found out massive success. For example, Microsoft, right? So they have this various Office 365 applications. They have their Skype, right? So all these services need a lot of scale, right? So there will be millions of people who are using it. So they already kind of built the technology foundation, building blocks, and all of that. The same way with Gmail, right? So they also started building all the things internally. So those were the building blocks, right? So it was only used within that particular company. And the one of the breakthrough that we had was with Amazon.com, right? So Amazon as such is the retailer, right? So what they had is like they were actually growing at a really large pace, and then there were the existing traditional infrastructure, right? Whatever they had, it was not actually helping them to scale. So when I say scale, what it means is like 10,000 people will be coming and accessing the site at the same time. At the time, there will be server timeout, the server is not responding, right? So those kind of challenges were there, and then they were using some of the cloud computing concepts, right? And then once they started using it, it was actually helping them to deliver these services very better. So if you try to launch Amazon.com, it immediately loads without any delay, right? So that is when they started realizing it. Okay, so it is a problem that everybody has. So Amazon had, and Google had, and Facebook had, and everybody had. So then Amazon thought is like, okay, now if we have a problem, everybody has the same problem. So now let us go and start offering some of the services, right? So that others also can help us to build that infrastructure. So that is how it started. And then Amazon came up with the very first customer facing cloud services, which was basically S3. And that is how the whole concept of cloud computing, previously which was only done by the big tech companies, started being used by everybody, right? When I say everybody, you as an individual, right? So for example, you can be building a mobile app, okay, and that particular mobile app can also use the cloud infrastructure. Whereas a really big organization, right, for example ICICI Bank, or any of the healthcare or whatever it is, anybody can actually go and pay a small amount or for the services that we use, and then you can start building the services on top of that, right? So that's how cloud computing as a thing actually started. It was not something that was started in a day. So it was a practice. It was a certain way of building applications that was practiced internally in companies like Microsoft or Google or Amazon. And then once they started feeling that okay, we have solved this problem for ourselves, now let's go ahead and solve this, expose these services, and try to help other business also, okay, to have the same kind of problems to be solved. So they expose these services. So that is why Amazon, they have a separate entity called as AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, and they kind of provide a lot of services. You can go and buy that. Same way Google, they have a certain provider called GCP, Google Cloud Platform. And with Microsoft, they have a platform called Microsoft Azure, right? So they are going actually and going it. So as an end user, so or basically, for example, you are an app developer like I mentioned, or you are going to build a certain service, then you will be able to go and get those things. So that's primarily the model, right? So when we talk about it, here it says, right, the new cloud computing and delivery model inspired by the consumer internet services. So when you say consumer internet services, we are talking about Microsoft, Google, and all that stuff, right? And end user focused. So basically, it's all about what the business customer wants, right? So he wants some infrastructure and etc. So he can actually do that. So what the cloud does is like self-service, right? So what do we mean by self-service, right? So let's say, for example, if you want to write a code and you want to deploy it, right? So you need a server, right? And then if you want a server, you will not be able to get it immediately. So there will be other people in the company, right? I'm saying in a previous, probably a decade back. So you have to go and request them for a server, right? And then they will actually kind of provision a server. So when I say server, right, it could be just server in a sense like there is an OS that is installed on that, and then it will be provided to us, right? And after that, when we want to run an application, say for example, we need a Java application to be run. So you then actually go and install an application server, and then on the application server you will go and install the your actual Java code, right? It could be a web application or whatever it is. Same way you want to install a MySQL database server, right? So you go and request somebody, so then they will actually build the server with the base OS they will install. Then we will need to have install the database server, and then you have to do it, right? So the whole process it used to take few weeks, right? The reason why it is like all the servers that I'm talking about, right? So it is actually it will be available in a data center, right? For example, if it's a small company, they may have a small server room in which they may have a stack of mini boxes. So basically, it's like something like a CPU, right? That we have at the desktop, but not necessarily in the same time. I'm just giving it for a reference point, right? So you will have a lot of servers that will be available in a data center. So a data center is nothing but a really large warehouse, right? Wherein you will have thousands of servers, right? So for example, in the previous world, what used to happen is that as a company, let's say for example, now ICICI Bank wants to launch a new website, right? So they will go to a data center. There will be many people who will be providing the data center services. So there they will say, I need 10 servers to be made available to me, right? So I'll go and say I need 10. I need it for 1 year, right? And then we will say, yeah, that's what it is, right? And then what happens is that then they will give the details server, and then you will be using them, right? And that is how it actually starts working, right? And then the only problem that we have is for example, in this case, right, ICICI Bank may not know whether it needs only 10 servers or it needs only 5 servers or it needs 500 servers, right? Because they don't know the business demand, right? So that is when we need some kind of flexibility. Right now, the previous world, everything will be fixed. For example, if I want to build an application and maintain it, you have to predict in advance, okay, how much of database capacity required, how much of server capacity is required, and after that only I will be able to and then I have to upfront I have to pay for all the infrastructure that I'm getting, right? And that was actually a problem. And then with the self-service option, right, that we see here, so the time taken to provision these kind of servers is actually reduced, and then you will be able to quickly go ahead and do that, right? So that's pretty much what is the advantages that you get with cloud computing, right? And the next thing is like, so cloud computing is as such, right? So it's all in the internet, right? Without internet, you cannot do that. Pretty much everything, right, that you're going to do, right, will be actually connected to the internet, right? And so some of the attributes that we are talking about, right? So we talk about the scalability, right? Now, I think this is a real life scenario that you also see, right? So we all, I think, purchase mobile phones, and this flash sale that happens, right? So Amazon or Flipkart, right? They have this flash sale, right? So generally think about a very layman example, right? So typically in Flipkart, there will be 10,000 users accessing the site at the same time, right? So for example, 10,000 users may need probably 100 servers, right? So it needs, I'm just giving a very, simple example. So 10,000 people are viewing the entire site, and then you need 100 servers, right? Now during a flash sale, so that is going to be a lot of traffic that is coming in, right? Instead of 10,000, there may be 10 lakh, customers accessing the same site. So then how Flipkart or Amazon will be able to handle this load, right? Because they had only 100 servers initially. And then for this, and also the flash sale is going to be there only for 1 hour, right? Or probably 30 minutes, right? So what would Flipkart or Amazon do? So for example, for 10 lakh, users, right? You may probably need 10,000 servers, okay? But you need it only for probably that 30 minutes or 1 hour. So are they going to go and get 10,000 servers and keep it even though they may not use it, or they are going to only have 100 servers, but then for other users they will say the system is down, right? You're not able to access it, right? So they cannot do that, right? So they cannot do get 10,000 servers because just because there is a flash sale that is happening on one day, and other days it's not happening. So the other thing is like they cannot just use only 100 servers because other users, right, who are also trying to buy at the same time, they also will not be able to uh, access the site, right? So the site will be down and all that stuff, right? So that is where the advantages that we are getting with cloud computing, right? So the scalability part of it is whenever you have a user demand, right, and then you are generally using 100 servers because that is what how it is. but suddenly I need to go to 10,000 servers, right, for that specific 1 hour period. Then that is when actually, cloud computing actually helps us. So you'll be able to, have an automation towards which if there is load coming in, you can actually increase that to 10,000 servers. And then once the load decreases, you can come back to the same, previous 100 servers, right? And then cloud computing as such, the cost, it will only incur on a pay as you go model, which means that for that 1 hour, you have 10,000 servers used. Only for that you will be billed. For others, you will not be billed, right? So this is a very one of the important advantages of going with cloud computing, right? Because based on your requirement, you can actually you can get more servers or less servers, right? The second thing is the low latency, right? So what we mean by that is, so whenever you have this when you are trying to access amazon.com or youtube.com, right? So if you are in India, so in the previous world, what used to happen is that the service will be hosted somewhere in probably in the US, right? youtube.com will be in the US, and then from India, if you're going to access that site, there is a geographical distance, right? So between maybe 10,000 miles or 20,000 miles, so you need to get the request served from US, right? So it's going to take a lot of time. So that is when what happened is that the big companies, and if you want to have less response time, you want to load it very quickly. So everybody, they started adding more servers in different regions. For example, if you are accessing youtube.com and you're from India, so they are going to have a service in India, so that the request will be immediately served with very less time, right? And the same way, if there is somebody accessing youtube.com from Europe, so there will be servers within Europe, right? And then the request will be served from there. So there is a less latency that is there. So in the previous world, these things are all not possible, very easy, right? Because you don't know where to go and buy servers in the Europe, or you are in in South Africa and all that stuff. Now with cloud computing, so the cloud providers will actually you'll be able to with the click of few buttons, you will be able to provision the servers all over the world, right? And then you will be able to give a better customer experience, right? And the next thing is guaranteed performance. So performance is basically like it's going to be available all the time, right? There will be that is what it is. And then the other thing is like all these uh, uh, cloud providers, right? So when you're having a server, they will have a lot of backups. So for example, if the server one is down, they will always have a backup option of 2 or 3 different locations. So basically, when you have a code that is written, right, so it will not be there in one data center, so it will be there in 3 data centers. So but the primarily it will be returned from one data center. But if there is a failure, then it is going to switch to the other data center, and then they will be able to provide the service all the time, 24/7, right? So these are the main aspects of it. Okay, so with the cloud computing, right? And so when I talk about cloud computing, what are the major components that are involved? Is basically the compute cover, right? So this is nothing but our CPU or virtual machines, right? That is what it is. The next is like basically the networking aspect of it. This is mostly like our the modems that we use, right? Wi-Fi modem routers. So it's something at a large scale, right? That's what the networking is all about. And data storage. So data storage is more to do with your databases. You want to store your images, videos, and all of that. So there will be services for that, right? So this is essentially what cloud computing is all about, right? And so these are the deployment models, service models. So I'll probably give you more inputs on the next slide, right? And so this is the essential characteristics, basically a recap, right? So on demand. So if you want a database server, you want an application server, or you want a space to store your images, everything. So with the click of few buttons, you will be able to immediately get it. And there is a rapid elasticity. You can scale up and down based on whatever is required, etc. Right? So that is how it is, right? So I'm just taking a pause here, right? And yeah, so I just have few queries here.
Students, please,
Okay.
engineering students, computer science
Yeah,
students, please post your queries on the chat box as early as possible. Yeah, we have 3 queries, Mr. Dinakar. One you've already answered, the basic concept of cloud computing.
I have few queries.
Yeah, you have one from
So I
Zahir
think,
Ahmad, which says,
yeah,
is cloud secured? Is every cloud secured? Can it be hacked? Is there a possibility of breaching the security of a cloud platform? Is
yeah.
Zahir's question.
So as such, right? So cloud as such, it is. Yeah. So cloud as such, right? So like anything, so everything can be hacked, right? It is not like, there is no foolproof security. So even with cloud, if you have your application on cloud, there is every possibility that it can be hacked, right? You can actually do the traditional things, whatever we can actually do in a normal setup, right? The same thing can be done in cloud as well. So what you need to do is like you need to understand how to secure your applications, right? So whatever the applications that you are now building, so how do you ensure that you are having the best practices, that you have the best process in place, so that it cannot be hacked, right? So everything to the short answer is anything can be hacked, whether it's in cloud or wherever it is, right? It's but we have tools and processes with which you will be able to, you know, avoid that from happening. Okay. Uh, yeah. So the other question is like, what kind of job opportunities are available in cloud computing? So there are so what happens, right? So you are now learning Java or different programming languages, right? So all of them are going to be useful in your cloud computing as well, right? At the end of the day, you are going to use the same programming languages that you currently learn even in the cloud, right? But the way how we are going to deploy things into cloud, so that is what is going to change, right? At the fundamental level, you are going to use the same Java, same Node.js or Python, but the way how we are going to package the application, so that is what is going to change, right? So how do I probably prepare? Okay, so how do I prepare for cloud computing, right? So the first thing I think you can probably step up is like so with all the major cloud providers, right? So we have AWS and GCP and Azure. So they all provide free trial accounts, right? So you have a free tier which you can actually register for. I think you may probably need a credit card, but they have actually provide free. So you can actually go and explore those services, right? And then there will be a lot of tutorials that are available. So you can also use that to get started. So those services are available for a year or so, but so that is how you can actually get started with cloud, right? And data security aspect of it, right? So data security is actually a very huge topic, right? So you have various options like encryption and authentication and authorization. So those are the probable options with which you will be able to handle security in the cloud, right? And so, yeah, what is the difference between cloud storage and computing, right? So cloud storage is nothing but you will be providing a space, right? It's similar to Google Drive, whatever a shared drive that you are providing, right? So you will be able to store files. It can be a image, it can be a JSON file, it can be a PDF or whatever it is, right? So those could be actually stored there. Okay, that is what cloud storage is all about. So for example, in AWS, you will have a service called S3, in which you can actually store your lot of your images and all that stuff can do it, right? So when you say computing, right, it is not computing. You can call it as a concept called compute, right? So what we mean by computer is basically the computing. Compute is the processor, right? So when you write a code, you have to run that particular code, and the running that code will involve servers that are being available, right? So using that, you will be able to do that, right? So data storage is where you store the data. It can be any format, right? So that is the storage part of it. The compute part of it is where actual your code, your business logic, whatever you are writing, that is going to reside, right? And is there any limit to store data? No, there is no limit. It's basically unlimited. You have to maybe pay more for it, but other than that, it is going to be there. Yeah. And cloud storage, is it permanent or a temporary storage? It's a permanent storage. It can be there for a really long time, right? So yeah, I think with that, right? So probably I'll probably move on now. So to the next part of it, right? So cloud service models, right? So what we are, this is some term that you will keep repeating, hearing it, right? As you start learning more about it. So the first thing is the infrastructure as a service, right? So what it means is you will be able to get a server, right? You will be able to get a storage. you will be able to get some networking resources, right? But other than that, there is nothing that you will get, right? So it's basically going to be just the servers that is available, and then what we do with that servers, right? What do we do with the storage? Everything is left to us. That is called as infrastructure as a service, right? So platform as a service is basically what happens is that, let's say for example, you are building a PHP application, or you're building a Python based application, right? And then Python. So basically, you don't when you get a server, right? So what happens is that you need to install the OS, and after that you need to install any security related things that you require, and then there may be some other components that you may need to install before running your code, right? So platform as a service, what it does is it is going to give you some more additional on top of that. OS may be already installed, and then the other security related things may be already installed, and you may be able to read only your few components, right? For example, in the infrastructure as a service, if you are going to do 10 components, right? You are going to install and run 10 components. In platform as a service, it's going to be probably 8 components. The rest of 2 will be already taken care by the cloud provider, right? And so that is what the platform as a service is all about. Okay. And software as a service is something that we already know, right? Whatever service that is actually delivered over the internet, right? So that is what is called as a software as a service. So in a previous world, what used to happen is that you may have seen, right, there may be a building software. So the billing software may be a desktop based application wherein you will be able to, they will be doing the billing, but it is not connected to the internet. It is only connected to that particular system, and then if there's a new feature that you want to launch, you have to come to that particular system and then install it. But in case of a software as a service, all the features, right? So basically Zoom is also a software as a service, right? So they are delivering the services on the browser or the mobile app or the tablet, right? So that is what is called as software as a service. So these are the primary difference, model, right? So when you talk about infrastructure as a service, this is what it is all about, right? So they will just give you a server, and you will have to decide on what you want to do with it, right? So you will get a storage space, you will get a processor, right? In which you can write the code, or you will have some networking components and everything. So you have to use that. So that is what infrastructure as a service is all about. And platform as a service is, again, some of the components may be managed by the service provider, right? So when I say service provider, who I'm talking referring to is AWS, right? So that's basically a cloud-based company. And then we have Microsoft, and then we also have GCP done by Google. So in addition to that, there are other providers that are also there. So they will be DigitalOcean, right? So these are the other providers also are there, but these are the primary things that they will do, right? And in case of a software as a service architecture, what happens is that we don't need to handle anything. So it's basically a service that is rendered over the web browser, right? And that is what it is all about, right? So if you look at this particular picture, right? So the architecture diagram, whatever you see here, and in the bottom part, right? So previously in the previous world, before cloud, right? So data center is all about just hardware, right? They will have CPU, memory, disk, bandwidth, etc., right? So in when you come to the cloud, in the infrastructure as a service world, what happens is that on top of the hardware, they will install something called as virtual machine, and then they will create some storages, and then they will expose it to you, right? So that's basically the Amazon EC2 and all the stuff, right, available. Then the next level on the platforms, right? So basically the Google App Engine and Azure, and then simple database, all of this will be there. And on the software as a service model, you have Google Apps, right? Facebook, and anything on the delivered over the internet, we can call it a SaaS model, right? And this will give you a very good idea, right? So for example, in the traditional world, on the on-premises, when we talk about, basically it's a data center. So what happens is that when you say client, what we mean is, for example, our client could be ICC Bank, right? So ICC Bank will be responsible for doing everything: networking, storage, servers, virtualization, everything. But and then there won't be anything. So they have to take care of all of these various IT operations, right? They have to ensure it's secure. They have to install the OS. They have to install the runtime. They have to install the data. They have to run the application. So everything will be done by them, right? But in case of infrastructure as a service, what happens is that the networking, storage, servers, virtualization will be taken care of by the cloud vendor, right? And then you have to only install the OS. And in case of a platform as a service, what happens is that in addition to OS, some middleware and runtime component, right? So for example, if you want to run a Java-based application, right, or you want to based a container-based application, so those also will be provided to us. you, and then you will be able to. And in the case of software as a service, the vendor takes care of everything. So, for example, if you are going to use Zoom, right, or you're going to use Gmail, right? So from our side, we are not doing anything. All we are doing is probably pay them, and then you're probably using it, right? So we are not doing anything else, right? So that is what it is all about. Okay. And the other options is like, things is that public cloud, private cloud concept of it. So I'll probably explain you what it is, right? So public cloud meaning, so you can actually, like, it is actually open to everybody, right? So for example, you may be a small company, you may be a really large company, you will be able to go and use the services provided by the cloud provider, right? So that is what is called as public cloud. And when you talk about private cloud, what happens is that, for example, some applications, right, a healthcare hospitals, right, they may want to have their cloud secure, right? They want to keep their like, service everything secure, and they don't want to, use third-party service, right? So that time the private cloud concept comes into picture, right? So that way, in a public cloud, for example, Nike may be running their applications and server in a secured way, and next to that there will be Reebok, and then you will be also having multiple companies that they are actually deploying their application and all of that, and then AWS takes care of some of the services and all that. But in case of private cloud, individual companies, for example, they, from a security perspective or from a compliance perspective, they will have their servers running on a private thing, so they have absolute control over what AI can do. So that is what is called private cloud, right? And hybrid cloud is basically like, what happens is that there may be some infrastructure that is already available, right? It is not in cloud, but then some of them will be in the cloud, right? So that is what is called as hybrid cloud. So they will use both. Some of the applications may be running in cloud, and some of them will not be running in the cloud, right? So that is what is called as hybrid cloud. And traditional IT is something that I actually shown to you, right? So what it was, and what are the things that we use. In addition to that, the community cloud is there. So that is something not very like, widely used, but that is pretty much, for a specific case, right? For example, for weather forecasting, right? So some like, companies can come together and then offer a service, and that can be used. So that is what is called as community cloud, right? And I'm just taking a pause here for queries. Yeah. So is there any possibility to transfer our data to another server? Yeah. I think those are all possible, right? So data transfer between one server to another server. It is probably not a server. It basically a storage place, right? So either it could be a like, shared storage in which you can actually transfer data, or it could be from one database to another database, from one server to another server. You will be able to do that. So any other queries?
Students, any more queries?
Okay. So let me continue. Yeah. So now coming to the business benefits of cloud computing, right? So I think probably at this point of time, right, I would want to take a small break, right, and then give you an example, right? So let's say, for example, you are going to start a new business, right? So the business is all about wanting to build a food. You're wanting to get into a food business, right? So all your expertise is all about, is about making delicious good food, right? So that is your fundamental like, your skill set, right? Or that is what it matters, right? All that matters in your business is that you're going to make awesome delicious food, and you're going to serve customers, right? So that is what is all about your business, right? Now now think about it, right? So when you want to now start a food business, right? So what do you need? You probably need a place, you need a real estate wherein you can go and start your business, right? And after that, within that, what you need is basically, then you need electricity, then you need water, and what else you need, right? So you need your premises to be secure, so you need a security, then you need power, and then and then you need a kitchen, right? And within the kitchen, what you need you need a lot of different appliances within the kitchen, and then you need your cooks and everybody, and then your people who are serving the food, right? So this is all club together is what is going to deliver that experience, right? So basically, in the food business, other than making delicious pizzas, or your like pastas or whatever food, right, noodles or whatever it is, right? So as a business, right? So you are going to only concentrate what is your actual business is you are going to make awesome food. But then there are a lot of other things also you need to take care. And that is going to take you a lot of your time, right? And then energy and all of that, right? So now if you want to think about it, right? So instead of starting a restaurant or a small business outside, so for example, in a standalone place, right? So you need to take care of a lot of things. But if you say, for example, you're going to start the same business within a mall, right? So what happens when you're going to start it in a mall? So in the mall, what they are going to do is that they are going to take care of electricity. You're going to pay for what you're going to use. Then they are going to take care of water. They are going to take off host different securities, right? So at that place, the only thing that you're going to use is basically that they are going to give you a kitchen, right? And in the kitchen, you're going to go and start building the cooking food, and you're going to serve it, right? So there's a lot of infrastructure related things, like do I need more space because I'm going to have a heavy crowd in the weekend and all that stuff. So you don't need to worry about it if you're going to do it within a mall, right? So that is basically a very loose analogy, right? So when you're going to start the same hotel or restaurant outside of a mall versus within a mall, there's a lot of things that is being taken care of, right? And then you, for example, you're going to start that business, and if it's not going to work out, then after 2 3 months you're going to vacate, right? And then if you are going to, it's going to be like really successful, instead of one kitchen, and you're going to expand it to two kitchen, right? So a lot of things are taken care, right? So that way cloud is also going to help us that way only, right? So instead of managing a lot of server and all the other stuff, right, you're only going to concentrate about your business logic, right? What is the business logic that I'm going to do? If I'm a bank, all I need to care about is how to attract a customer to my website, how to make them sign up an account, right? So everything else, right, so in terms of server is all basically like it's an overhead for us to manage all of that, right? So the cloud services is going to help us on all of that, right? So the main benefits is basically the cost reduction, right? And scale, right? You can actually scale up and down, and it's going to be flexible to us, right? And it is also going to be reliable, right? In terms of doing all that, right? So when we, the one point here is like the utility pricing, right? So let's say, for example, you need a place to live, right? So you need a house. Now there are two options to us, right? Either you can buy the house, and then it's going to cost probably 30 to 40 lakhs to you, but you can also rent the same house, right? So it's probably going to cost you 15,000, right? So that's the flexibility that cloud is going to provide you, right? Instead of upfront, investing on a lot of servers or other infrastructure things, when you don't know, right? You're going to start a new business, it may succeed really well, or it may even collapse, and then it may going to reduce, it's not going to be in the business for a long time, right? So the upfront cost and all of that can be avoided if you're going to use a cloud, right? So basically the capex to opex that is mentioned here, that is what it's all about, right? And yeah, so the scalability, agility, and flexibility, reliability, right? So that's what is primarily the main reason why business are all going to cloud computing now, right? So one day you're actually starting a new business, it's becoming a super hit, then you need more service and all of that, so the cloud will be able to help us to do that, right? Even though you're going to pay more, but you're going to immediately get it, and your customers are going to be delighted, right? So that's what the business benefits of cloud computing, right? And then in addition to end users, right, even as a developer, right, or you're going to write the software and all of that. So even for the internal purposes, right, when you want to develop the, you're going to write the code, and then you're going to test it and all of that. Even for that, I think, cloud computing is basically going to help us, because you're going to immediately start, build the servers and then test it, right? So previously everything used to take time. So for example, like this is one statistics, right? When you want to provide a new test environment, right? So previously it used to take weeks, but in cloud computing, it's going to take it in minutes, right? And within that, you will be able to do everything, right? And then everything from weeks to minutes, you will be able to do that, right? So that's one benefit that you actually get, right? And yeah, so I'm just going to proceed. So I'll just like take the Q&A to the end, right? So these are the main advantages that you actually saw, right? So now with all these advantages and all of them, there is also risk, right? I think you already talked about it, right? So how secure is the data, right? So for example, one problem is less control, right? So since the servers are all going to be managed by AWS, right? We don't have much control. So and then government are also a bit concerned, right? For example, Indian government says Facebook and all the companies, if you are going to create the our data is going to should be stored only within India, right? So for example, any video or images or whatever you are creating, it should be stored only in India, because government is not very like comfortable with these data being stored in other countries, right? So same with banking information, all that information. So basically in cloud, right, so there is a less control is one particular problem, and that is where there is more rules compliance coming in. Okay, the data should be, for example, in European Union, so they have their own like new rules as to how the data should be stored. And then the next thing is like technology maturity, because it's a relatively new field, right? Cloud computing. So all the providers are actually building their own services with their own standards, right? So you are going to write a code and deploy it in one cloud provider, right? It may not work in the other clouds also, right? So basically there is no much of a standard that is being maintained. So that is one another problem. Second thing is like vendor lock-in, right? So vendor lock-in is about, so some things that is working in one provider is not going to work in others, right? So because it's all not the same way, everything is built, right? So that is the other problem. And then the security aspect of it, the data security, right? So these are general risks, and for every risk there is a alternate options, on how it has to be done. Everything is being evolved, but it's most of them it's all work in progress. Okay. And I think this is something that we already covered on the risks aspects of it, right? So again, right, so this is basically like it's more from an organization perspective. What do you want to do, right? How do you want to go with the cloud journey? You just have to plan, then build and deliver, right? So it's pretty much from an organization perspective that you are looking at it, right? So this is like what we are talking about is like instead of thinking of everything as an infrastructure, you're talking about an application, right? So for example, you're going to have a certain service. That service will have a server and all that stuff, right? So there will be another application that will have its own server, right? So instead of service being shared, you're going to have an application as the main focus, this end server that we're calling about, and then that is going to be useful actually, right? So this is pretty much it, right? So cloud is basically an opportunity, right? So how are we going to take advantage of that is something that you can actually do that. So just to wrap up, so there are some few challenges that we have on terms of security, and how we are going to handle the control, etc. But irrespective of that, I think all the major players and every company, right, they are actually now moving to the cloud, right? So whatever the infrastructure they had existing, so everything they are mostly moving towards either public cloud or private cloud, right? And that's pretty much what it is, right? I will probably take a few questions, and then I think we should be good actually. Okay. Okay. So I have few questions. I'll probably run through that. Mm, So what kind of job opportunities are available in cloud computing, right? So as I said, right, so any programming languages that you are learning, so that is going to be used in the cloud computing. Only the delivery model is what is going to change, right? For programming, so there may be some bits of changes that you may need to do in your programming, but otherwise, what are every other programming that you're doing is still going to be relevant, right? So if you're going to be a Java developer, Python developer, or HTML web developer, all of that particular skill set is going to be used in cloud computing, right? So but the way how we are going to use it in cloud, right, it is going to slightly differ, but otherwise I think it's all good actually, right? So from a job opportunity perspective, other than these programming languages, right, so there are some other few different skill sets are also required, right? For example, something like a DevOps engineer, right? So who will be only managing the infrastructure part of it, right? Your code, once you commit the code, it should be deployed, right? So those kind of things are all taken care. So that is where the DevOps engineer, security engineer, so those are additional new things that are available. But from a programming perspective, whatever you're doing, right, or learning, that is going to be useful, right? And second, other question is like, is Android Studio better for app building or Eclipse? I do not have much knowledge on that, but I think yeah, I think Android Studio should be okay, should be good, right? So does the payment gateway also work on cloud, right? So I think so. cloud, right, is it, as you see, as an end user, when you access any of the services, for example, YouTube or whatever it is, right, or Facebook or Instagram, you don't know what it is, right? So all you know is basically it is served via the internet, right? So you don't really have, so whatever things work in the normal world, it would work also in the cloud. We can make things work in cloud, right? And is cloud computing can be used in financial industry? Yes, yeah. Every other banks and all the mutual fund, everybody is actually using cloud. But there is better, some data security related aspects is also something that is being thought through. But other than that, right, I think every other industry is using the cloud technologies. Yeah. So I think yeah. Any other queries that you have?
Students, any more
I'm actually
queries?
good from my side.
Yeah, you have covered on the entrepreneurship also. There were a few questions sent personally to me on how will a business person make use of the cloud computing platform. But you have covered, I mean, post that question, you have addressed that those advantages of entrepreneurs using cloud platform. Thank you for that. Rest students, for rest of the students, do you have any more questions?
Yeah.
Arun, you can type the question
Yeah.
in the chat
So
box.
how is
Arun,
it
please.
useful for general? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how is it useful for general public, right? So as a general public, right, you don't really know whether it's basically cloud or whatever it is, right? When you are going to access Instagram, right, or you are going to use WhatsApp, right, you don't really care about it, right? Where it is running. All you need is like you want your message to be, delivered, received, or your video should be streaming immediately, right? So it's not from an end user perspective, whoever is using the services, right? So basically the SaaS services. So for them, it's not going to change. But if you are going to build the next Instagram, you're going to build the next YouTube or Facebook, right? So then for those, you can actually, as a young developer, right, as an entrepreneur, you will be able to leverage cloud services, and then you will be able to delight your customer, right? So that is what it's all about.
Okay. Any further questions which can be
So I
compiled and
think
sent to
so.
me?
One just a final add on, right? So we may have.
Yes,
So I
Dinakar.
think right now, right? I think personally, if you think about it, yeah. So it's basically it's like a golden age actually for developers, right? So developers are the new superheroes in cloud computing, because the reason why it is said is because you have a lot of you are able to write code, and then you will be able to easily create this infrastructure and then deploy the code, right? So you will be able to deliver the services quickly, right? So previously that was not possible, but now it's easy, right? So for example, if you want to compete, you are going to build a new product, like very similar to Instagram, but it's actually better than Instagram, right? So you don't have a problem. You can easily scale with the help of these cloud providers, right? And then you don't have to really worry about, okay, how I'm going to have so much of servers or all the infrastructure. All you need is a great idea and a good team through which you will be able to build an application. Then you're good to go and take over the world. You can actually even challenge Google, Facebook, and all that. Because of I don't know infrastructure, I don't have infrastructure, right? That is not going to be the case. Everybody will be able to go and do those things. Yeah. So any free courses regarding cloud computing? I think so. That's one final point, right? So YouTube is basically one of the really good platforms. You can actually go and search for anything and everything in YouTube. So basically, it is not a very professionally done thing, right? So there may be few developers, right, who are actually like studying in college and all that stuff. They start uploading content, right? So that's basically a one way to learn, but that is not a very recommended way. We have to go with like very good material and all that stuff, right? Train the staff. But other than that, just to get started, probably you want to just flavor it. For example, you have not seen how AWS it looks, right? So then probably you can go and check in Google, right? So basically, Google is the is the primary driver with which we are all still having our jobs, right? So we use Google for everything. We use Google, we use YouTube extensively to learn, read, and every other problem that we have, you go and check in Google, somebody else would have already solved it, right? So that's how it's actually working. So if you know how to use Google well, right, and I think you are good enough developer, right? So that's how it is.
Sir, sir, I have one question, sir.
Arun, there's a question. Arun, your audio is not clear.
Yeah.
Ma'am, now?
Yeah. Make it faster.
Yes, ma'am. May I know who is responsible for data security, sir? Provider or client?
He wants to know who is responsible for the data
I
security.
didn't
Is
get
it
that. Can you just repeat it?
Yeah, he wants to know who would be responsible for the data security, the client or the provider.
So, if I'm not wrong, the question is like
the person responsible for data security,
yeah,
whether
so
it was a
basically
client
that's
or
the
the
concept. It's basically a good question. So there's a concept of yeah, so it's a good question. So it's basically called as a shared security model, right? So there are a few aspects of it with the cloud provider will be responsible, right? For example, at the very base level, right? So there are a few things for which you will be responsible. And as a person who is developing an application, you have to be responsible for a few things, right? So it's basically a shared joint responsibility.
Okay. Any further questions? If any further questions, please send it to me. I will consolidate and get the answers by mailing it to Mr. Dinakar. He will be supportive with us. So we will we'll end the session now, Mr. Dinakar. We thank you for being here. And we always believe that what one learn, if it is not being applied, then there's a failure in learning. So we need to develop a system where not only we learn from the learned, but also from the experienced. That is why we brought you in, Mr. Dinakar, and you have given them a complete enrichment on the concept of cloud computing in such a small span of time. Our students are really fortunate to learn from the experienced. Thank you, Mr. Dinakar. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us. I will consolidate the feedbacks and I'll send it across to
I think
you.
it was nice interacting with everyone, right?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice
Thank
talking
you.
to everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
bye.
you. Students, thanks for participation. Faculties, thanks for being with us. Dinakar, Mr. Dinakar, there is one small request from the students. If you could share this PowerPoint presentation as a PDF or something with us, it will be helpful for the students to make reference. Is that feasible?
Yeah. I think I can do that. Yeah, probably.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I'll check on that. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So there are a
Thank
lot
you.
of thank you messages from
Thanks,
the students
everyone.
as well on the chat box. Thank you so much for enlightening them. I'll end the session. Thank you so much. Any feedbacks, please send it across to me through mail.